And the curtain is up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. Well, folks, are you awake after that? That was the wonderful Jane Eaglen. And this is a name that conjures up several images for me. There is the dramatic diva with a voice that soars, a voice that is luxurious. It has at once the essence of silk and the strength of the ocean surf. A dramatic soprano that was born to take on the roles of Brunhilde and Isolde, and let them come alive through the freedom and strength of her God-given voice. And then there is the Jane Eaglen, who is the last from Lincolnshire, England, the woman who was born into a salt-of-the-earth family and showed her first musical prowess on the piano. That is the Jane who loves wrestling and the singer Meat Loaf. She would listen to his music when warming up before a performance. The girl has good taste, and she's keeping it real. As a singer, I continually ask myself, what is it that we want from a human voice on the operatic stage? Well, I had the good fortune to be working in a production of Wagner's Die Walküre at Scottish Opera in the early 90s. Jane Eaglen was singing Brunhilde. It was the early days of her rising career, and she wielded her sword and sang Hoya to Hose as if she was singing an intricate Mozart aria, with ease and linear passion. She could sing Wagner's marked trills, as you heard, without the labored effort in the sound, which can often be the hallmark of other divas, who perhaps have sung too much Wagner for too long. I was held in rapture by a burnished quality in the lower and middle voice of hers. That is the quality that I want to hear on the operatic stage. But more than that, she possessed an inner knowing of the woman she was portraying. Brunhilde was a goddess who was remarkable, and the human goddess in Jane Eaglen on stage was soon to make history with that sound on every major international operatic stage in the world. There is a section at the end of Act 2, Scene 2 of Die Walküre, where Brunhilde addresses the fate of Siegmund, singing Weh mein Welsung, im höchsten Leid muss dich treulos, dich treule, verlassen. I would linger in the wings at Scottish Opera until Jane had sung that line. There was passion and warmth in the phrase that she produced that was a transparent sign of her honesty in making music. It was achingly real, without pretense, the mark of one who lived and felt her music-making to the core. Even with her soft singing, we could feel that vibration through the floorboards. It was simply unforgettable. Those are the images of Jane Eaglen in my mind, and I have her with me today on Center Stage. So, wow. Good morning, Jane, and welcome to Center Stage. I am thrilled to finally have you here.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. I'm blushing at those words from you. It's lovely to reminisce myself a little bit about those days. The first Brunhilde I did.
That really was, wasn't it? I mean, there was so much going on for you at that time too, wasn't there? I mean, you were singing in Austria. I think you were singing in Vienna. You had just been working at E&O and then John Mauceri with this first Ring. In fact, it was the landmark Richard Jones production.
That's correct, yes. I know Rheingold was done, which didn't involve me, which was done, I think, the year before. And unfortunately, they were never able to finish it with Siegfried and Götterdämmerung. Although I know Richard Jones did do productions at Covent Garden, which didn't involve me. But it was very interesting. And what was great about it was we had, I think, literally 8 weeks to rehearse. And so for my first Brunhilde, it was nice to have that amount of time to really sort of solidify and make sure that, I had the stamina and that everything was feeling good.
And do you remember all the Valkyries on stilts?
I do remember them on stilts, and I remember, I think it was Newcastle, that the stage was raked. It had a little tilt on it. Oh. And I remember part of the staging was that I had to sort of collapse at the front of the stage, and the Valkyries walked all around me, and I could really feel the skirts of these ladies on, these ladies on stilts. It was something.
They were unbelievable. I remember they rehearsed for weeks and weeks. They must have had some personal insurance going with that opera house. I don't know that I could have taken that job as a Valkyrie and really had, the guts to get up on stilts and sing. But they were remarkable. And wasn't it incredible the presence they had, Jane?
Oh, it was phenomenal. I mean, it really was quite an incredible sight. And what was difficult for some of them, I know a couple of them were very scared of them, and it took a very long time. But what was hard for them was that they all basically ended up being the same size. So if some of the ladies were a little shorter, they had very tall stilts, and the taller ones weren't quite as big. But I'm terrified of heights, so I couldn't have done it. But some of them were, and they worked through it and did an incredible job.
And so did you. You were amazing in that role. I remember John Mauceri was conducting, and you also worked with him in the Norma you did at Scottish Opera.
Yes, I worked with him many times, and lots of my sort of first roles in original language with Scottish Opera, because I'd been on contract with ENO, English National Opera, for quite some time, where everything was in English, and so it was nice to have a company where I could go and do some roles for the first time in the original language. I did my first Donna Anna there, first Brunhilde, first Norma. I did Fiordiligi there, and of all things, I did Mimi too. So it was a really great place to have the time to work on these roles that would eventually, become part of my stable, really.
Wow. I love you did Mimi. I actually did not know that.
I was very young, and, it was fine. It was, again, John Mauceri wanted a bigger voice, I think, for the role, and, it was fun to do.
Oh, wow. So I've just got to ask this right off the bat. Okay, where does Meatloaf come into all of this? And don't get me wrong, I love Meatloaf, and I think he brings an operatic presence to whatever he does. But tell me about your relationship to his music.
Well, I sort of came to it a little later. I know friends of mine that were fans of his in college. I wasn't sort of so into it at that point. I think I was too busy figuring out what opera was at that time. But I just kind of always loved performers that really perform and really give of their all and sort of have a sort of visceral voice in lots of different ways. So it doesn't necessarily have to be operatic. And I always felt with Meatloaf that he really put a lot of passion and kind of drama into his singing. And I just really was also drawn to the music. The style of the songs that he would sing were quite operatic and used a lot of strings and a lot of orchestra arrangements and so on. So I just always been a fan, and I like to have a tape that I don't have now, but I had a tape of various songs of some of Whitney Houston, who I was also a big fan of, and Meatloaf. And when I was sort of showering before I'd go into the theatre, I'd sing along to this tape, and that was how I'd warm up. So I warmed up to Meatloaf. I was actually doing a performance of Isolde at the Met, and the production was very bright. It was very bright on stage and threw back a lot of light into the audience. And basically, Isolde doesn't stop singing for about an hour and a half, but then she does stop for a little while and stands there while King Mark comes on and tells her how horrible she is. And so I was standing on stage looking out into the audience, and I saw Jim Steinman, who is the person who wrote all Meatloaf's songs. And I saw him sitting in the audience, and he had long grey hair and a black T-shirt with a white skull and crossbones on. And I'm standing there at Isolde thinking, oh, my goodness, that's Jim Steinman. So when I came off at the interval, I asked somebody who was working at the Met, I said, could you do me a favour and go and find this gentleman and ask him if he would possibly come round and meet me afterwards, because I'm a big fan of his. So the guy from the Met went and found him, and afterwards Jim Steinman said he thought he was going to be asked to leave because he was wearing a skull and crossbones T-shirt at the Met. But of course he wasn't, and this gentleman said to him, Miss Eaglen is a big fan of yours, and I just wonder if she wonders if you might go around and say hello to her after the performance. And he said, oh, of course. So when it was over, the man from the Met went and met him and brought him in my dressing room, and my husband said it was extremely funny because we both kind of stood there going, gosh, I'm a really big fan of yours, and oh my gosh, it's so amazing to meet you. And I said to him, I listen to your music before I sing, and he said, well, that's funny because I listen to Wagner before I compose. And he said that from being very young he would listen to Rock Around the Clock or something, some pop, whatever, rock music, and then he would just tune the change the dial on the radio, it would be Wagner. And it never occurred to him there was any difference. As far as he was concerned, it was just music.
Wow.
And he said, I write the things I write because I can't write the rig, and that's what I'd love to have done. But so much of his obvious passion for, big, romantic, orchestral and vocal music comes across in the music that he writes. So it was a very interesting meeting.
That's unbelievable. And thanks to the production and the light out into the audience, you could actually spot him.
Yeah,
that is incredible.
I mean, I could literally see pretty much everybody that was sitting in the stalls of the orchestra and the Met. It was so bright. So couldn't do it when you were concentrating on singing, but
of course. But I love this story. This is so real. And he must have been a fan of yours.
I mean, I don't know. I think he obviously he knew I was. He was coming to see the Tristan and so on. Was a big Wagner fan, most definitely. But it was just so funny that when we met, that we both had this sort of slightly nervous and shaky disposition going on.
Oh, I love this. I love this. The prima donna is loving this man in the audience with the skull and crossbones on the T-shirt. I love that. You are so real, Jane, and this is one of the things which makes you so great. Wow. And the other thing that has made you so great is your relationship with your original voice teacher, who remained your voice teacher all through your life, Mr. Joseph Ward.
Correct, yes. Yes, I auditioned for the Royal Northern College of Music when I was 17 years old, and he heard me then and decided that he would like to teach me. He said that he heard a couple of notes in the middle of my voice that gave him indication of how the voice might develop. But to my way of thinking, at 17, I sort of sounded like a boy soprano. It was, sort of hooty, nice, but small and so on. But he heard something in the voice. And actually, after 2 weeks of lessons, he said to me, one day you're going to sing Brunhilde and Norma. I said, oh, is that good? Because I really knew nothing about opera. As you said, I started off as a pianist, so most of my knowledge was of piano music or orchestral music, and so I was learning all about opera once I got to college, and he told me what to listen to and so on. But right from being 17, right through my entire career, I'm singing Isolde for the 5th time or whatever, there were still things that he was teaching me and still things I was learning from him. And he just was the most incredible man. He died a couple of years ago now, and that was very sad. He'd moved to Australia a few years ago, so I hadn't seen him for a while, but we kept in touch, of course, all the time, and he really was like a father to me. He was much more than just a teacher, and we had a really extraordinary relationship, I think. And I owe everything to him, really.
Oh, that's such a beautiful thing to hear. Opera singers today have a league of classes and consultants and trainers and teachers at their disposal. And sometimes I feel many have too many teachers. To have one treasured relationship like this with Joseph Ward in your life, I mean, this really is probably the most grounding relationship you can have. I mean, you never doubted that, did you?
No, I didn't. And one of the really helpful things throughout my entire career was that right from the beginning, I don't know why, but I just immediately trusted him. And I knew that whatever he said was right. And so, for example, with the Brunhilde with Scottish Opera, the company actually asked me if I'd be interested in understudying it. And so I said, oh, well, I'll talk to Joe. And he said, I'd rather you sing it than understudy it, because if you understudy, you won't get in a rehearsal. If you have to go on, you haven't had that time to sort of sing it into your voice. And the company didn't have a Brunhilde, so I went back and said, well, Joe thinks I should sing it. And they were like, oh, great, well, then that's what's going to happen. So there was never a time when I didn't believe him. And I have to say, he was always right. There were so many times he would say, nope, don't do that, that's not right yet. And I'd say, okay, fine. And I developed that, I think, myself, in that if something didn't feel that it was quite ready yet for me to do, I would say no. And there were times when he said to me, okay, that's good. I was asked to sing, in fact, Donna Anna the first time at English National Opera. And I worked on the arias with him, and he said, this is great. And I said, I just don't feel comfortable singing the ensembles just yet. They're too high. He said, then don't do it. If that's your feeling, don't do it. Trust your instincts.
Wow.
And having that sort of with me all the way to trust was incredible, was really incredible. And, it's, as you say, these days people seem to have this team of people behind them. And I understand that there's obviously a lot that can be gained from different people in this profession, your agent and your coaches and so on. But that was just not my experience. And because I was a pianist, I actually always taught myself my music. So everything I sang, I taught myself it at the piano. And so I didn't work with coaches a huge amount, only when I'd learned something just to sort of brush things up and so on. Mm-hmm. So it really was kind of me and Joe, and it was wonderful.
To me, that sounds like the perfect pairing. And I understand from what I've read that he always coached you with the idea of do not listen to yourself while you sing. Right. Go for the feeling. And this is like the centerpiece of my own teaching and many other great teachers, but, not so many get to that. And this is an essential part of singing the repertoire that you've chosen.
It really is. And, as he would say, you have to sing the same in the studio as you do on stage in a big opera house. Yeah. You can't change how you sing because you see a big space, because it's going to be dangerous, you're going to end up pushing and so on. So he always was, don't listen to yourself, never listen to yourself, just, rely on the sensations. And that's how I teach now. And as you say, I think it is absolutely the way to go, because too many people, I think, get in big theaters and try to give more voice than they really have. Mm-hmm. And then they don't last very long.
No, they don't.
And that's having a long career and being able to sing healthily the whole time is very important, I think.
Oh, it's everything. But Joseph Ward himself was a very fine singer, and I gather that he was a baritone who changed to tenor. And with each, he had an incredible career and an incredible recording career with people like Benjamin Britten and Peter Pears and the Royal Opera House. And so how did he make that change to tenor, Jane?
Well, he had an incredible career in lots of different areas, actually, and I think it went towards making him an incredible teacher. He actually started off as a boy soprano, and he sang in the music halls in England. And on one occasion he sang, and George Bernard Shaw went and congratulated him on his diction, which he didn't remember much about, but his mother was thrilled, he said. And so then after having been a boy soprano for several years actually, he then went as principal baritone at Covent Garden, joined the company the same day as Gwyneth Jones, and had a good career singing Figaro's and all kinds of things. And he did record a lot with Britten. He's on the original recording of Albert Herring as Sid with Benjamin Britten. He was Starveling in the original Midsummer Night's Dream. But I think he felt, and I think other people too, and he was working with certain teachers, that he was really always a tenor. And he then became a tenor, and his first job as a tenor was understudying Pavarotti in La Fille de Regiment at Covent Garden, which of course has 9 top C's in the aria.
Right.
So he really did sort of dive in at the deep end.
He sure did.
He toured Australia with Joan Sutherland. He sang with Nielsen at Covent Garden. He sang with all the greats. And then he sort of, not exactly lost his nerve, but I think he just didn't want the pressure of that kind of singing anymore. Right. And then he became a pop singer and had this incredible career mainly in Germany, actually. He made a lot of records out there of a sort of housewives' choice kind of thing. And they are phenomenal, some of these recordings, because he sings properly with the right style, but you still hear this incredible voice.
Well, let's listen to one of those right now. This is not a housewives' choice, I got to tell you right now, Jane Eaglen. This is Joseph Ward singing I Am the Preacher.
I am the preacher with a message for my people all over the world, scratching on the ground, looking for the peace that nobody has found.
Okay, Jane Eaglen, there's your teacher right there.
There he is.
What a top he had. Those notes are incredible. The ring.
Yeah. They really are. I mean, he really worked extremely well with sopranos, actually. I think he loved soprano voice, and he knew how to teach, people how to sing those high notes. And working with Sutherland a lot, he learned a lot from her. But he had an incredible technique to be able to do that. I mean, it was just hearing that. Every time I hear it, just makes me smile.
Oh, I bet. Oh, my gosh. Wow. I'm so happy you had that grounding. So I just have to touch on one thing. When I knew you back in the 90s, I mean, we know that opera singers go through a hell of a lot. You had a brief scare with a thyroid operation. And I know myself, I've had a similar situation. The nerves to the vocal cords are closely situated to the thyroid. But I remember I spoke to you briefly at that time, and you were like really unfazed by it all. Did you just have a knowing that things were going to be okay, or is this just a calm aspect of your personality?
I think I'm pretty calm anyway. I'm pretty laid back. I'm north of England, lass, and like pretty much unfazed by most things.
Yeah.
I actually discovered it while I was doing that Brunhilde with Scottish Opera, and I felt that I was taking in breath. It felt a little laboured, and so I had tests done and whatever, and they found I had a lump on my thyroid. So pretty much straight after the Brunhildes, I had surgery and had it removed. It turned out to be benign, which was great, of course. But it was kind of, I don't know, I'm philosophical about those things a little bit. And I do remember saying as I went into the surgery, I said to the surgeon, I said, okay, here's one of my high notes. And I sang him a high note, and I said, I hope I'll have that when I come out. And he said, well, I hope so too, but my first job is to save your life.
Wow.
And you kind of go, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, do that.
Yeah.
Do that, and the rest will be what it'll be. And, I did come out, and he came, they said, oh, don't speak for a week or whatever, and certainly don't sing for a while. But you know how it is with singers, you just know. You just know if your voice is there, if it isn't. And he came around the next day and said the surgery went well and blah, blah, blah. He said, how long do you think it'll be before you know if you can sing? And I said, oh, it's fine. I know it's fine. He said, how do you know? I said, I know it's fine.
You could just
feel. I had to sort of build up my stamina and so on after that for a while, but it was no problem at all.
Wow. What a lucky break for you. I love this. But your life has always been that way, Jane. I mean, really, it's so interesting how you've come from these humbler beginnings, in Lincoln, and literally raised your game to the top of the field. And one of the characters I want to talk about that you portrayed many, many, many times is Brunhilde. And I want to talk about, I get the impression that you're good friends with Brunhilde. Am I right?
Yeah, we are. I mean, I sort of half-jokingly say, the thing about Brunhilde is she's a big, fun girl, and that's just like me. What I love about the character, and of course it's slightly cheating because you get 3 operas to develop her in, but what I love about her is that she's smart and she wants to learn all the time. So, she listens to things that are told to her, or she sees things that go on around her and she learns. And that development of the character through the 3 operas is just so fascinating for me. And I just always loved sort of portraying that and seeing in every performance, can I just figure out a bit more about her, or can I learn a bit more about this and what's going on? And that was just something that I just felt really drawn to, as well as the music. I do think that singers tend to be drawn towards the music that really suits them. I don't know why that is, but I think it often is the case. And I just always felt, as soon as I started to listen to Wagner, I kind of understood it. And that's just how it is. Yeah. There's plenty of things that I've sung which I've found extremely difficult, and I'm certainly not saying that Brunhilde is not difficult, but it fit me vocally and dramatically, I think, and so was just something which felt very right for me. And as I say, plenty of other things did not, but I did fine. But Brunhilde just felt very much at home for me.
So here enters the intuition that we ride on as singers. Would you agree?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I always sort of try to think of her, I mean, everyone talks about the ring as though it's the gods and goddesses and so on, but really it's about relationships between families and so on. And I mean, the most important part of the Valkyrie is the relationship between her and her father. And so many people would come up to me after performance and say, oh my gosh, that just reminded me of me and my father. And, I thought it was all about gods, but it wasn't. It was about a father and daughter, and sort of saying, do you cry when you do that scene? And I said, well, no, because Brunhilde's not supposed to cry, but I think I'm supposed to make you cry. You're supposed to see that, I think. I think that's what Wagner wanted.
So I have to ask this. I know that your father passed away early in your life while you were 10, and he was an avid sportsman, and I realized that you said once that if he had lived, you felt that he would really have supported your career as a singer. Does your relationship with Wotan when you're singing Brunhilde have a correlation to the dad maybe you lost early on?
I mean, it's hard to say. I don't consciously think of that, certainly, but I do sort of feel, I obviously losing my father when I was 10, you haven't had that much time with him and you were still a child, so I never got to know him really as an adult, obviously. But I do think that he was very supportive in what I did, even when I was young then. I'd already started singing a little bit, and he supported that and was very proud of the things that I did. And in his way, he was a performer. He'd been a sportsman, and he then founded all the local soccer leagues in Lincolnshire, where I came from. And actually, to this day, there's a Ron Eaglen Cup in his honor, which is a sort of the Super Bowl of Lincolnshire, if you like. And so I think, he was a good after-dinner speaker, all those kinds of things. And I think he would have appreciated the performance that I did and how that sort of went to a different level. But I don't consciously think of that when I, think of Brunhilde and Wotan. But there may be something subconscious that's there that makes it a strong relationship.
Is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. Usually my listeners get a dose of Vici d'arte from Puccini's Tosca with me singing, but that wasn't me this time. Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard Tosca's aria in English, sung by my guest today. She is a singer, and guess what? She's not a diva. Dramatic soprano Jane Eaglen is definitely not a diva, and she likes to let everybody know about that. Jane is the kind of girl who doesn't obsess over her voice. But at the same time, she never veers from the solid technique that has made her a pinnacle of success in the world of opera. And as we continue in our journey together, speaking about her life and career in part 2 of our interview, I'm developing a newly discovered respect for her grounded approach to her singing career and now her teaching. Born in Lincolnshire in the UK, she made headlines early in her skyrocketing career with performances of Norma, Brunhilde, and Isolde, singing in the major operatic houses around the globe and becoming a favorite with conductors such as Riccardo Muti, Mark Elder, and James Levine. Recognized for stunning musicianship and knowing her way around a Wagner phrase, she has accomplished what many singers only dream of, recognizing the qualities of her voice and staying with the truth of her sound. Today, Jane joins me from the Boston area, where she lives with her husband, Brian, and their lovely puppy, Daisy. She is now teaching on faculty at the New England Conservatory of Music and passes on her truths to her eager young singers. And today we are going to look at her deepest challenges in life and how a movie soundtrack made her easily recognizable. Good morning, Jane Eaglen, and welcome back to Center Stage.
Good morning. Thank you for having me back.
Are you still reeling after our first interview?
Yeah, I enjoyed chatting with you so much, so I'm happy to do it again.
In our first interview, for our listeners who didn't tune in, we actually listened to Jane's wonderful voice teacher, Joseph Ward, and wow, what a revelation. And we know where Jane's voice comes from, in this day. Jane, I've just got to ask you, because, we're just real people now. What does a typical day look like in the world of Jane Eaglen and family at home?
Well, of course, in the time of COVID, I think everyone's life is a little different. Typically, my normal day is driving into Boston, teaching 5 students maybe, and, coming back, relaxing a little bit in the evening, taking the dog out when I can. But this summer, having been staying here, most summers I go to San Francisco to work with the Merrill Young Artist Program with the opera there, but that didn't happen, of course, this year. So I've done some online teaching this summer. I've taken up embroidery again for the first time in sort of 30 years or something, which I've actually quite enjoyed. So just, pottering around and really enjoying spending extra time with my husband, I have to say.
I love that. So are you singing the embroidery aria from Peter Grimes while we're doing the work?
I guess I should. I've actually never sung that aria. I've taught it many, many times, so I probably could. But, I do think of it every time I prick my finger with the needle.
Oh, I think you could pop that aria off. No problem. In fact, have you ever sung any Benjamin Britten?
The first thing I did at English National Opera actually was I understudied Miss Jessel in Turn of the Screw.
Ooh, exciting.
And actually did the sort of show performance of it and really enjoyed that. I would have loved to have done Lady Billows, which I think would have been a great role for me, but it just didn't ever happen in the circumstances. But, some of his other works and so on, but that's the only operatic role I've ever done.
Wow. So I have to ask you a couple things. I mean, one, I have a favorite tune of yours. It's actually from a movie. And, we didn't see it coming. We're watching this wonderful Ang Lee film called Sense and Sensibility. And to this day, it's still one of my favorite films by Ang Lee. And one of my favorite films, period. And here at the end, at the credits, here we hear the fabulous voice of Jane Eaglen singing The Dream. And, I've got to say, I watch the credits really happily because I want to bathe in your sound. That voluptuous sound, that lunar quality that you have, literally lunar. There is something about I referred to you in our first interview as an essence of silk in your voice. And I think that is truly so. So would you mind if we played a little bit of The Dream right now, that wonderful piece that you sing in the credits at the end of Sense and Sensibility? And here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the music of Patrick Doyle, and it is interpreted by the wonderful soprano, Jane Eaglen, who I'm speaking with today. Jane, I have to tell you right now, my pianist, David Hokelbohr in New York, is sobbing right now, okay? I know this for a fact. This is his favorite piece in the world. He and I have performed it several times. There is a luminosity about the arch and all these phrases that you seem to understand immediately. It's very Wagnerian in a way. How did you nab this gig, and what was the recording process like with Patrick Doyle?
I agree. I mean, I think that the song is so beautiful and it's beautifully written for the voice. So the phrases are just delicious to sing. It was when I had a solo recording contract with Sony Classical, and they were producing it was a Sony movie, and they were doing the soundtrack. And so I had a call, I think like 5 days before the recording date was going to be, and asked me if I'd be interested, and I said, of course. So they said, okay, well, we'll send you the music as soon as we have it, which basically arrived the day before the recording, sort of middle of the day by courier, I think. And I sat at the piano and thought, oh, okay, this is fine. So I went in, it was early afternoon, I remember the recording the next day. And when I arrived, Patrick Doyle, was just lovely and so happy to meet him, and he was very nice to me and so on. And he said, just hang on a minute, we're just rewriting the end of the song.
Oh, no.
And so him and the orchestrator were literally, the last 2 pages were being completely rewritten. So basically they just gave me the 2 pages and we recorded it. And we had several takes, mainly because it had to be a certain length, and literally between like 1 or 2 seconds difference it could be to fit with the credits, which had already been filmed. So that was the amazing conductor who was able to sort of take a half second off a recording or whatever, and it was very exciting to do, I must say. And Emma Thompson, who of course was the star of the movie but also wrote the screenplay, actually came to the recording and sat in the studio while we were doing it, and Ang Lee, the director, was also there, sort of telling me how this fitted into the whole story and why he'd wanted it with an operatic sound and why that was how he saw the end, and showed me the end of the very movie when I think Alan Rickman's character Colonel Brandon throws the coins into the air and then it goes into the music, and actually showed me that, and then we recorded it. So it was very exciting, I must say.
And how... we all wish we had your life right now, Jane Eaglen. I mean, really, and you probably don't realize this, but I'm a real film person. And I do regular shows on film music and directors. And in this studio, we love film. So the opportunity to be with Emma Thompson and Ang Lee, and I know on that film, he was so specific to his actors that he had them nightly write letters within the character they were playing. So I can only imagine when he spoke to you, he spoke with the same specifics.
Right. I mean, I can't remember the exact details, but Kate Winslet's character sings the music, not the whole song, but some of the music during the movie. And basically he wanted it to sort of all be sort of drawn together, so the whole movie came to a close, and it had a sort of a grandeur to it, which is why he wanted the orchestra and an operatic kind of sound, so that it had that sort of final feeling to it, I think, which I think was very interesting. And Patrick Doyle's music, he's done lots of movies with Emma Thompson and also with Kenneth Branagh, and I think his music is so beautiful and just very sort of luscious in its way. And it was a great experience.
And his orchestration's wonderful, always.
Yeah.
So, wow. So were you paid well for this gig?
I can't remember, honestly. I'm sure it was fine. I mean, it was just one of it's been very nice in my career to do things that are a little bit different. And that was one of those things. I mean, just don't to get off the subject of that too much, but one of the very first things I did was I played a music hall singer singing Rule Britannia in Land of Hope and Glory in a TV series that was actually Colin Firth's first big sort of thing that he did, and also Laurence Olivier was in it. So I actually got to have dinner with Laurence Olivier, and Colin Firth brought me gin and tonic on a train journey. So those kind of
that's not too shabby. Yeah.
Nope, it was a very nice gin and tonic.
Yeah, and those two boys, had great careers, didn't they? Oh my,
Yeah.
I love these stories. But the dream from Sense and Sensibility, plays another role in your life, doesn't it? I mean, at one point, you were diagnosed with a brain tumor. And can you share with us, how you came upon, the symptoms for this, what you went through, and how you kind of came full circle with this song?
Yes. Well, I started teaching at this point. I was teaching at a liberal arts school in Ohio, and started to notice that I was having trouble playing the piano with my right hand. And because I play a lot for my lessons, I really noticed it. I thought, is it carpal tunnel? I just couldn't really control when my fingers came down on the keys. And gradually it got worse down my right side, and I couldn't hold a fork even, and I certainly couldn't write. My writing was very sort of jagged. Then my balance started to go, and I had a few tests with the doctors and so on, and eventually they said, well, we should send you for an MRI. So I had an MRI, and I had a phone call about 2 hours later saying you have a golf ball-sized tumor in your right cerebellum in your brain.
Wow.
So being in Cleveland was great. They sent me to the Cleveland Clinic to see the head of the brain tumor clinic there. And he basically said that he was 95% sure it was benign, and he was 95% sure that he could take it out successfully. But it was too big for anything other than surgery. And if I didn't have it done within 10 days, I would probably end up with brain damage permanently.
Oh, my gosh.
So 10 days later, I was in surgery. I had 8 hours of brain surgery and came out with a bit of mesh in my head and a little bit of a hole in my brain.
And was it kind of like the thyroid experience that you just knew you were okay when you woke up?
Yes, I did. I wasn't worried about it, partly because the symptoms had got really bad just before, and I actually really couldn't walk properly at all. I was in a wheelchair and so on just because of my balance. And so I kind of just wanted it dealt with, like, just get this thing out of my head and let me move on.
Absolutely.
It was, as often these things are, I think it was much worse for my husband. Well, I know it was much worse for my husband. But I was just like, just do it, get it out there, and we'll be fine. And I remember sort of waking up, I was being moved to ICU, and I remember sort of waking up as they were moving me from the operating theatre, and in my best British accent, I sort of, as you can tell, I still have the British accent, but when I get sort of, I don't know, when I'm coming through from anaesthetic maybe, I don't know, I get very northern, and I heard my voice saying, is it over? In this very strange northern accent, and hearing sort of laughter in the voices going, yes, Jane, you're fine, it's okay. I was like, oh, good, and carried on. So then and I felt sort of fine, and I went to recovery, and my husband came to see me, and everything was feeling good. And so then they took me to ICU. So this was probably, 2 or 3 hours after the end of the surgery. So I was still pretty groggy, but coming to. They took me to ICU, and the two young nurses came in, and they started chatting to me as they were sort of changing my gown and making me comfortable and so on and so forth. And so they said, what do you do? And one of them said, what's your job, whatever. And I don't often sort of tell people, but I thought, well, I'm going to be here for a while. So I said, well, actually, I'm a singer. And they said, oh, do you sing around here? And I said, well, no, not really. I sort of sing all over the place. I'm an opera singer. Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. Have you sung, the Met? And I said, well, yes, I have. Oh, my goodness. And they were, chatting away. Then one of them said, well, my favorite song ever is an opera song, and you won't know it, but it's so beautiful, and I listen to it every night before I go to sleep, and it just sends me to sleep, and it's just my favorite, and it's from a movie called Sense and Sensibility. And I kind of lay there thinking, I must still be asleep. This can't really be happening. And she went, yeah, it's just gorgeous. I love it. And I listen to it literally every day. And so I just turned to her and I said, well, that's me singing that. And they both just stopped what they were doing and looked at me like, okay, she's had brain surgery. She's not quite with it. I'm sure that's what it is. And they said, really, that's you? I said, yeah. And they were like, oh, okay, anyway, well, great. And then they sort of did their jobs and off they left. And 2 minutes later came back and were like, oh, my gosh, it really is you. I think they'd been and looked me up on YouTube or something. And it really is you singing that. Oh, my goodness. And it was very bizarre, I have to say. It was one of those things that you couldn't make up. You couldn't make up that story.
That is extraordinary. You made their day. And
very strange.
I think that is the most fantastic full circle story around this song. You know, you should be writing to Ang Lee, you know, and telling him about this.
Well, you know, I'm in the process of thinking about sort of starting to write a book, and it'll all be in there.
I would think you should, my dear Jane. I would think you should. So, in line with that, I mean, what's really the most important thing to you right now, Jane Eaglen?
I mean, I just have always wanted to sort of have a happy life, and you know, I feel very grateful that people are sort of inspired by some of the music that I've been able to provide, and you know, that makes me feel good that. Just recently, I mean, I don't like to talk about myself in those terms, honestly. I feel a little uncomfortable sort of saying what I've done or whatever. But just recently, the Met did rebroadcast the Tristan and Isolde that Ben Hepner and I did in '99. It was on their streaming service. And I was really touched to get so many emails and messages and so on from people saying how much they'd enjoyed it, and people saying, oh, right now, things as they are, I just really needed this right now. And it was very lovely to know that still has an effect on people, and that's very comforting and very sweet to know that people still feel that way.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
And I love teaching. I really do love teaching. I'd always wanted to teach. It wasn't just, well, when I don't sing, I guess I'll teach. And passing on the things I learned from Joseph Ward, and also the things that I've learned, you know, from standing next to Pavarotti and singing Turandot on stage at the Met, you learn some things from that. And so that's just things that I wanted to pass on, and I love doing that, and I love working with the singers that I have, and really do enjoy that so much.
This is incredible to hear, and you're just so low key about it. I mean, yes, you do have a few things to share from this amazing career of yours, my Lord, and that's the other thing. You're still performing, aren't you?
Yes, a bit. I mean, I did a recital at the end of last year, and I would have done an immolation scene this summer if COVID hadn't happened. I'm in the lucky position of if it's something that I want to do, then I do it. And I still, if it's certain things, I enjoy it very much. But I also enjoy not having to worry every day about my voice. And not that I ever worried per se, but, you know, for 25, 30 years, I couldn't go in a restaurant that was noisy, or I've never been a drinker, but if I want to have a glass of wine now, I can have a glass of wine, where that couldn't happen. Or always concerned, so-and-so's got a cold, or well, I can't go and see them then. And just the things that you have to do for this career, that you just take it, you know, you do it. It's not something that you're sort of aware of, but not having to worry about what's happening with the voice is a very nice thing.
I can imagine. And now you're happy with your home outside of Boston, and your beautiful puppy and your wonderful husband. And I do understand that, because sometimes we're chained to the fact that we can't have a really normal existence. And now, you know, I feel that you have a little more space to have that kind of life and to relax.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, it sounds a little facetious, but one of the reasons I didn't want to sing so much is because I did want to get a dog. I've wanted a dog my whole life. And so, you know, to have that sort of normal life, because I really never have. I went on contract to English National Opera when I was 22, I believe, or 23. So it's really been a long time, and it's wonderful, and I've loved it so much, and so grateful and happy to be able to do those things. But there is something nice now that I'm a little older to have a sort of slightly more relaxed and normal life.
And you have time to write that book and do well in that. You know, I've just got to ask you one thing. Have you had any moments in this incredible career of yours? I mean, when you skyrocketed, it was very quick. You were singing everywhere. You were a favorite in Seattle. You formed amazing relationships with people like Spade Jenkins and intendants everywhere. Were there ever moments where you were actually performing on stage where you could put your technique aside for a moment, and did you ever find yourself transported to like another plane, like you were literally singing out of your mind and just finding a kind of nirvana in that?
It's hard to say. I think in order to really, you know, do your best vocally and also dramatically, I think as a singer, you have to have one foot outside of that performance. You know, I always say to my students, you can't be a method actor and be a singer, because you have to be in control of your instrument. I would tend to find that I would get the most moved or affected by, when I was on stage, by the moments when I wasn't singing, when it was the orchestra was playing.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, the end of Götterdämmerung would get me every time because I think it's just extraordinary, and Siegfried's Funeral March as well in Götterdämmerung. And certainly when I did the immolation scene in concert, when I would still be on stage for the rest of the play out, that was some of the most want to be part of that, to be sort of in the middle of that incredible sound and that music making, and know that I'd been part of it. I wouldn't be affected by it until I'd stopped singing. So I can't say that there was ever, when I was actually singing, that I felt that, because I always was not necessarily thinking about technique, but thinking about what's going to happen here. And you know, if you're not feeling quite right, if something doesn't quite go right, you go, okay, what's going on here? I've got to fix that for the next time. Not necessarily anything that an audience would even notice, but just things that you just, it doesn't feel quite like it should.
But see, that gets back to your amazing musicianship. You know, you are definitely part of the orchestra yourself.
Yes.
And I've heard a rumor that you're such a fantastic pianist that you can actually score read at the piano keyboard. Is that true?
Not really. You mean from a orchestral score?
Mm-hmm.
No, not really. I maybe could have done a bit. I could probably sort of fudge it, but that's often what I do with a lot of particularly if I'm playing for students that are singing from the bigger rep. I might not always play the right notes, but I know how the pieces go. And you know, when you're working on those with young singers, I think that's sort of more important. We've been talking about all my health issues, but about 10 years ago, I actually lost the end of my ring finger on my left hand. I slipped getting out of the shower, and the end of my finger came off. So I can't play like I used to because that finger doesn't reach the keys.
That's unbelievable.
So there are some issues there, but I know how to sort of which bits of a score to pick out. I know where the melody needs to come, what a singer needs to hear. And a lot of singers will say, okay, I know you play some wrong notes, but it's much easier to sing with me playing than sometimes with an accompanist who doesn't know the style of the piece.
Yeah.
So I try to do that. But I might have been able to score read maybe years ago, but I haven't tried for a long time.
Oh, come
Probably
on,
don't
you're
want
being
me to
modest. You're being modest. I know it. Hey, I want to know, Jane Eaglen, what was the best process for you? Is it the process of learning the music? Was that more exciting, or was it the performance?
Hard to say. A bit of both, really. I mean, some rehearsal processes really come to mind as being really extraordinary. When I was very lucky to sing Norma in Italy with Riccardo Muti conducting, and we had a month or 5 weeks rehearsal in Ravenna in Italy, where he had a summer house. And so basically I had 5 weeks of 6 hours a day personal coaching with Muti, which was extraordinary. And he kind of taught me my Italian, and we worked on so many things of the style, and that was just one of those times that I will never forget. That was amazing.
I can imagine.
Extraordinary. So, you know, that was a really incredible rehearsal time. But then sometimes doing, like, the performances of my first ring, which was in Chicago. I'd done Valkyrie before. I'd done Siegfried a couple of performances, but I'd never done Götterdämmerung. And so I didn't really get that much rehearsal. So my first cycle was also my first Götterdämmerung. So it was Tuesday Valkyrie, Thursday Siegfried, Saturday Götterdämmerung. And I'd worked very hard on that, and I was kind of ready to go. But even so, I'd never sung the whole thing on stage. I'd never sung it all with orchestra. But as performances, that was something which I will never forget. My first ring, and Joseph Ward was there, which was so incredible that he could be there, sitting in the front row, which I didn't love at the time, but it was okay.
But he loved you. Jane Eaglen?
I didn't need to see his face all the time I was singing.
Oh, you are a goddess amongst singers. I've been thrilled to have you as my guest twice, not once, but twice.
Well, thank you for having me.
I hope when we meet next, it'll be over a glass of wine. And in the meantime, everyone look for Jane Eaglen's recordings. This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is now down on Center Stage.